Okay, here we are. We've got the print gantry. This is the entire print gantry off of the Qidi Q1 Pro. That's the quick prototyping printer that Qidi released a few years ago. And what we're going to do today is we're going to replace these two idlers with toothed idlers so that we can increase the belt tension on this model. Now, this is the same procedure you might do if you were going to replace one of the bent idler pulleys, if you happen to have that issue on yours. We discovered that there were some issues with the idler pulleys, that they're very weak, and therefore we had to replace all of the idler pulleys on this one. We had two idler pulleys that were particularly bad, so we went ahead and replaced all of them. So if you're like me and you're comfortable with assembly and disassembly, you don't have to keep track of all the screws. Pretty much they go where they go, and if you have extra screws when you're done, just keep an eye out. You'll probably find where they belong. So take the extruder cable out. Alrighty. So I got the extruder cable off. I don't want to damage this while I'm moving it around, so I'm going to finish removing that. I didn't want to bore everybody with the half an hour that's already invested with removing the side panels and front panel and top panel and back panel and everything to get the gantry out, and the 16 screws it takes to get the gantry out of the top. So that's been done ahead of time. So we're going to get that out of the way. We're going to remove this cable too, just get that out of the way. The less stuff we have dangling, the better, because these belts are kind of a pain. So one of the things we have to do first is take tension off the belts. I'm going to take my heat shields off of my motor there. Easily replace. That's just aluminum tape. Let's see. It doesn't look like I'm going to get in there with that. So we're going to need a tiny screwdriver. And these are the automatic belt tensioners, and I say automatic with an asterisk because you actually have to loosen the locking mechanism, let it float, and then the spring will apply tension, and then when you're done you lock it back down. The reason you don't leave it floating on the spring is that when you're accelerating, say you're accelerating the head pretty harshly, it'll actually bounce that spring, so you don't want the belts riding on the spring tension itself. So in this case, we didn't pull the locking mechanism out first. We actually pulled the belt tensioner out first. And you can see way down in there. Alright, yeah, if you can see down in there, belt tensioners are locked with these two screws down here. So now that there's no tension on it, I'll go ahead and pull this out. I'm actually going to take the screws entirely out because I want the belt tensioners completely out of the assembly when I'm done. So I'll be replacing those two idler pulleys also because I didn't have enough idlers the last time. There are a total of 12 idlers in this system. However, typically you'll get idlers in 5-packs or 10-packs, idler pulleys. The cool thing is, if you're doing the idler pulley replacement, then you might as well buy a 10-pack of regular idlers and 2 toothed idlers to put in, and then you'll have all 12. So we've got screws falling out everywhere, and that's fine. These are screws that I've put in, so I'm going to keep them off to the side because they are not the originals. So as you see, the tensioners right here, so we're going to pull them completely out. this one I have to loosen the motor assembly to pull it out. But while I have it here, I'll just kind of show you how that tensioner is assembled. So you've got a pulley in there, and it looks like you can't get that out, but actually all you gotta do is push the pin out, and now you can replace that idler with a new idler. You don't have to take the belts fully off to do that. So, but I'm gonna go ahead and push that out. I've replaced the idlers in these assemblies here already. So everything but where we need the tooth idlers has already been replaced. However, to do that, we actually have to take everything out of the frame, because you can't get to any of the idlers with it still in the frame. And that is all of these little screws on the top here. So we're just going to go ahead and pop those off. And my screw bit back. There we go. Okay. Now, the reason I took the tension off first is because once you pull these screws out, the stamped steel is no longer holding the gantry square. So we don't want any pressure on that gantry when we start. So that's why I went ahead and pulled the tensioner system loose. Alright, so that is all of those. Now that steel frame just pops off. Set that off to the side. Okay, and now we are looking at the gantry itself. And again, I'm actually going to pull this other idler out here. Okay, and you'll see why in a bit. Those, let's see, get me a little pusher here. Those will get replaced with the two smooth idlers that I pull out. Now the idlers we're replacing are these two idlers here. So you've got the idler here, which is running against the tooth side of a belt, and the idler here, which is running against the tooth side of a belt. Now the reason I'm replacing these is because a Gates rounded tooth belt, if you put a lot of tension on it, then you increase your accuracy. However, when you do that, you end up flattening those round teeth on those belts. And then eventually they become so flattened that they start chewing on the drive pulleys of the stepper motors. And then that wears them down, so they're round again, and then they flatten again on the smooth idlers, and then they wear down, and they flatten, and they wear down, and that's what eventually chews the teeth off your belt. We don't want that. What we want is nice tight belts with good precision without ruining our belts at the same time. So these idlers only come out by taking this assembly off. And this is kind of a pain to show, but this plate has to come off. And then inside of there, you'll be able to actually slide the axles for those idlers out. So I'm going to do this one here. Okay. Use the torque gun here. So this is just a Bosch handheld. The reason I use this, I'm using it in reverse right now on full lock. But when I go to assemble this, I'll actually set this to a set torque, depending on whether I'm screwing into plastic or whether I'm screwing into metal. And I'll set a different torque, and I'll be able to run them in quickly without having to worry about over torquing them and without wearing my hands out. So we'll go ahead and pull these out. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. So now we have this bearing is floating free, and you can see inside the two idlers. This one is covered up by this belt, but we'll still be able to get it out. So we'll just turn that belt kind of sideways and we'll be able to squeeze that pulley out. And this one is a smooth face pulley on a smooth side of the belt, and that one's fine there, and we're going to leave that one in. But basically they look the same. We'll actually be pushing that pulley's axle out, and that will get us the part we need. So, and this is where it gets kind of tricky because we have to take it apart to do that. So I'm going to have that off to the side. That kind of stay where it needs to be there. Alrighty. Now this one, just going to try pushing it backwards. And if that doesn't work, then we'll lever it out gently from the side. Let's put a little flat head in the tiny screwdriver here, and we can just kind of lever against the pulley. And you see what I did was lever against the pulley, and you see how that pulley's pushing out there. So we're going to make sure we don't accidentally flip any of the belts. Leave these right where they're at. Get us a little extra there. And then we're going to slide that whole pulley out, taking both belts with it. Like I said, we'll be changing it with all the belts in place. So again, we've slid that out with both belts. So if you're just changing to the tooth idlers and you're not changing the rest, this one will slide out with both belts on it, and we'll be able to change it. Now keep in mind there's little spacers on these. Little nylon spacers. If you can preserve them, try to. One on both sides. I found a few of them melted on mine, but was able to preserve most of them. So we're going to slide that pulley out. You can see that pulley's slidden out there. I've got two spacers. I've got one smooth face idler pulley. I'm going to take that. I'm going to replace it with my 20-tooth face idler. So we're replacing smooth with toothed. Easily done. So now we're going to drop that in there. We got one nylon spacer on one side, one nylon spacer on the other. And the hardest part is getting that back in. So we're going to loop it back into both of the belts. And we're just going to make sure we don't pinch. Pinch those little guides, and then we're actually going to use the belts themselves. Just kind of pull that tight in there. Okay. Now we can go in here. We're just going to snap the axle in, top and bottom, and it just kind of clicks in. All right, and now that belt pulley has been replaced. Okay, and now making sure we haven't flipped any belts. Again, as long as your belts are good, we're going to line the bearing back up in here. Make sure it's kind of centered. And then this plate only goes on one way. The screws don't match up the other way. And this is what I was talking about before. We're going into plastic here. Screws threading into plastic. So I'll usually set this to 5 maximum if I'm going into plastic. And your driver is going to vary. So if you don't have this particular model, you might find lower or a higher number is more acceptable for plastic threaded screws. And that one's done. Okay, so we're just going to switch that over to the other side, and we'll do this one here. And again, I'll take my driver and we'll turn it to full lock because we're removing screws. 1, 2, 3. Screws out and the plate is free. That frees up the bearing, and we're just going to move that over top. Get that out of the way. And now again we have two belts in the way on this pulley. We're just going to take our little flat head against the flat side of the pulley, kind of lever it back until the axle pops free, and then that pulley will come out with both belts around it. That's why we need no tension on this. So that pulley's going to come right on out of there. Okay. Alrighty. And then we got two nylon spacers. I gotta get a little more tension here. There we go. We're gonna peel the pulley out, keep the belts together so we don't flip them. That's our smooth side idler. We're going to reuse those. And we're going to put our toothed idler in. We're going to put our nylon spacer on one side, nylon spacer on the other. Get that axle nice and centered in there. Hook it back inside of our two belts. Slide it back in. Again, we're going to try not to accidentally pinch those nylon spacers. Okay. Now that the pulley's in, we're just going to go ahead and make sure that axle is fully snapped in. Top and bottom. Pulley moves freely. Alrighty. Now we have the mess of belts here. Get everything sort of a little more squared up. Now we're going to put the bearing back in. And again, this only goes on one way. And again, going to take this down to a torque setting I feel comfortable with. And this is not an impact driver. The clicks you're hearing are the clutch letting go at the correct torque. So, now we're on to the last thing here. And that is, since I had already replaced all the other pulleys on here, except for the two on the tensioners, I'm going to be reusing those. So we will grab the two little axles for those. Okay. And I'm actually gonna flip this over, get a little bit better view on it here. Okay. The reason I didn't have it flipped over is because they're kind of oblong. So yeah, let's go back to the way we were, because the two motors sit at different heights there. So we're gonna take that, slide it down, slide it down. All right, square it up a little bit. Not very important until we actually assemble it. You can't get these in the wrong place. They only line up in one spot. So we're going to put our new pulley in. Now it's important that the pulley goes in against the flat side of the belt. So, and you'll see there's a space here and like a tab there and no tab there. It's important the belt exits that side. And then all we got to do is drop that axle down through the pulley there. Get it lined up. Come on. Alright, do this from the other side. We'll find home. Push that through. There we go. And we're going to do the same thing on this one. So again, there's an entrance and an exit. I'm going to make sure the belt's exiting on the side without the tab. We're going to put that axle in. And line it up. send it through. There we go. So now those go back into here, just like this. Kind of snaps in. Again, remember, entrance and exit. Just going to go in like that. Just kind of snaps in. And now we get it back. Before we put any other parts in it, we're going to put it back into the assembly. The only parts that are necessary to double check are these two retention brackets. These are threaded, and they have to go in for the spring tensioners before you put the gantry back into the frame. So let me bring one of those up to show you real quick. So we're not actually assembling the spring tensioners until it's in the frame, but we have to put the threaded plate for the spring tensioners in before we put it in the plate, because you won't be able to get this one in on this side. This one you can get to, but this one you can't. So last thing we're going to do is we're going to check for errors on our belts. We've got one that's flipped here. Alright, that's good. And we look pretty good here. No more flip belts there. Alright. Good. So we get our frame back. And the easiest way to tell which side is the rear is it's got the two holes for the, has the two holes for your drag chain. So that's the rear. So we're going to put it this way here. We're going to drop the gantry down in. And lock into place here. Alrighty. Get the two outers put together here. And again, these are going into plastic, so I am going to use that same torque setting of 5 on this. We're going to make sure the little clip is in the middle. Right. Now, if you were actually replacing all of the idlers, which is something I've had to do on this machine, then I would recommend pulling the belts completely out, replacing all the idlers and then reassembling it. Replacing one idler at a time while leaving the belts in, it's kind of a pain. But it can be done. So we're going to pull this one up so we're going to square here. And again, there's no tension on these belts. We do not have the tensioner springs installed. Okay. These screws, and I have to find the rest of them. Looks like I'm a couple short here. I do remember that from when I had assembled it before. There was a few screws short. Yeah, let's we're gonna borrow this one. And we're going to put it there. So, that is all of those that I have. Ah, here we go. I found them. They were on a different workbench. They may or may not be from this printer, but they are the same parts. Alright, now that's assembled. Again, belts are super loose, and I see an issue that I have here. It was kind of in the shadow, so I didn't see that. just going to make sure that that's not pinched there. And while I have it up here, this particular screw, when it gets back into the frame, when you reassemble it, that screw must have a washer on it, or else the screw tip will actually touch the belt. You see how close that is there? Don't want that. So, our belt is in line now. Get the little notch in where it belongs. Send our screws. Okay. Okay, and that is the gantry, and the rigidness of that gantry is all in this stamped frame. The rods themselves don't hold the square. So, alright. That is now installed, and now we're going to put the springs in. So again, remember how I said it's important to put those in? This one you can get to, this one you can't. So it's important that that retention plate for those two screws on the spring assembly are installed. Now, when we put this back together, basically what happens is this spring pushes against that idler pulley, and that's what gives it the tension that it should have. Now we're going to increase that tension, and all we have to do that is we're going to put a spacer in the bottom of this, and that'll push the spring a little tighter, and we'll put those tensioners back on. So that'll provide more tension in there. So we're not going to change the springs, we're just going to give it a little more push. So easy peasy. So I'm going to save that for a separate video, increasing the tension on these belts. But essentially the last thing to do is put the tension on the belts, and then this goes back into the machine. And there you have it. That's how to change out the two smooth face idler pulleys for tooth face idler pulleys, so that you can increase your belt tension on your Qidi Q1. Thanks for joining.